Okay. Episode 2 of This Could Have Been Better. I don't know where my framing is. There's no computer here. I'm not used to that. Transhuman Ascendant. We are not going to touch on the record label stuff. We have already touched on that. That could have been better. That was arguably the death point for this band. But anyway, this is going to be weird because I'm going to be going backwards chronologically and comparing older albums to newer albums using the benchmark, just because in my brain that works. Transhuman Ascendant is probably, out of almost everything, going to be one of the hardest things to articulate what's wrong with it, but I'm going to do my best because the vocal arrangements on this release were really good. The vocal performances, I feel, were kind of hit or miss at the time. I think they're amazing, and there's some parts that are genuinely amazing. Like Agents of Retribution, I think, is an underrated song in like every capacity, including the vocals. Those vocals are so good. The problem with this album is I was trying to make a follow-up Design Abstract album. I was trying to write the third album in the trilogy, making the Design Abstract sound new, but sound like itself. And as a result, I phoned in a lot of stuff. It's in the details. The orchestration for a lot of this it's not good, or it's not there at all. I kind of reverted to just normal string patches or like blast synth sounds or just general synth sounds. I also, if you compare technotheism and constructs to this and to Medum Technosis, the former two I wrote a lot of the guitar parts for, whereas Transhuman Ascendant and Medum Technosis, I didn't. I just let Logan do his thing. I would go through and I would be like, hey, this riff needs to be more like this, or let's punch in something here. But overwhelmingly, the majority of the stuff, Logan had free reign, and I just kind of arranged it. And that's not a bad thing, but it affects the pacing and obviously the structure. Logan's riffs are, generally speaking, very busy and complex and melodic. And so, for example, like the opening of Calculated Brain Death, and then that breakdown, it's like three notes, right? Like, that's my sort of thing. Or like on Transhuman Ascendant, that like Plague Bringers riff, I'm pretty sure was me. Not to say that my writing for those things is better, because like I wrote Deus Ex Machina, that riff too, like whatever, I wrote that too. It's just when I'm in control of that stuff, I think the songs fit together more, and that's what was lacking in Transhuman Ascendant. Is it was just kind of a blah, and it wasn't necessarily an information overload. I think that the album pacing for what it was fine, but the songs lacked a uniqueness. Like, I tried to make the Design Abstract a formulaic band, and I succeeded. And although from a musical and technical standpoint, and even from like a writing standpoint, it's an accomplishment of an album, is kind of uninteresting. And I feel like that's why there was not a lot of interest. It was also because the record label fucking fumbled it. But like, you know, we have fans regardless of what happens with releases, and they weren't as excited as they were about the last two. And that's kind of the biggest thing. There's some songs that I personally don't like because they were just stuck in production hell, like Degradation of the Sacrosanct. I went over that song over and over. I must have scrapped it a couple times. Just kept rewriting it. It just wasn't working for me. I think the best thing I did was put those like mid-range clean vocals. People seem to like that song now. Whereas with Agents of Retribution, as far as I'm concerned, that song's pure gold, start to finish. Doesn't really seem to interest people, which is interesting to me. Obviously, my say isn't the final say in things, but I always find shit like that interesting. Production wise, compared to Constructs, it's a step down. It's still okay. Like I listen to it, and maybe there's one or two things that I'd be like, that's not that bad, or that could be better. But overall, like it doesn't take me out of it. When I hear technotheism, it takes me out of it. Like I'm like, oh god, it's bad. I don't know if I want to say that the album should have been shorter. I will say that the closing track, like Technotheism Part 2, doesn't feel like it's earned. I think it's a very pretty arrangement, but it feels incongruent because I wanted it to feel like a credit sequence, and I feel like it wasn't earned because the flow of the whole album, it doesn't have that arc like Technotheism did. And it was partially because I was just trying to maximize how good the songs sounded on their own, but more than anything, I was just trying to unify. I was trying to make everything as homogenous as possible on that one. And I think that's the weakest point of it, because there's a lot of cool stuff on it. There's like some really fun bass stuff, synth stuff, piano stuff that like you will not hear in Constructs. Constructs is more plain, but it has the stuff that I care about more, like orchestration. Future albums, as we go back further, it will be a lot more of a technical analysis. There's a lot of stuff in Metamtechnosis that I don't like from a writing perspective, an editing perspective, probably a mixed perspective too. This one isn't that old, so it could have been better, but I don't think it was ruined by production. Production could have been better, but it wasn't like ruined by that. That wasn't what ruined it. Because every album that I release, there's a thing that grates on me when I listen to it, which is why I don't listen to it. Constructs I listen to. I don't have much negative shit to say about it. Like I like that album. When I stop listening to a release, it's because there's something in it that just bugs me. And whether that's like a real tangible thing or just a me problem, doesn't matter. I'm not going to listen to it. And with Transhuman Ascendant, the main problem was just that nobody gave a fuck. And again, record label fumbled. But even still, it seems like Constructs, like, it didn't do quite as good numbers wise as Transhuman, but people seemed to give more of a shit just from the experiences and the feedback that I saw, whereas Transhuman Ascendant was just kind of silence, you know. There weren't really any reviews, there wasn't really any criticism or praise. It was just kind of meh. And that's kind of like the worst thing that it can be, sort of. Yeah. I want to say it lacked direction. It was more that it had an incorrect direction, because the direction was, let's make this sound as homogenous and uniform as possible. And like I said, I succeeded at that. It was just what ended up being to the detriment of the album, you know. Would I do the vocals different if I had to do them again? Yes, absolutely. If I re-recorded the vocals, they would sound a lot better. That's fine. If I remixed it, it would sound slightly better. But these are not the deal breakers for me. I think the biggest thing is it lacked interesting like ideas that kind of grabbed your attention, like hooks, salient moments, as my one professor called it. And we talked about this. Me and Logan talked about this when we were producing it. We're like, because I said like every song should have at least one, not necessarily a hook, but like a moment where you're like, oh, I remember that thing, that crazy thing, whatever it is. And it could be the intro, or it could be the chorus, or it could be a really crazy bridge or a breakdown, right? And we talked about it, and he's like, I think these songs have that. And he's like, you know, they're super memorable. And it's like, yeah, so I think we're the only ones who think that. I don't know, like, it's it probably goes all explodey when I sigh like that. I didn't put a pop filter on this because I didn't want to. I don't want to say wasted potential or wasted opportunity. As a technotheism, the third album in the trilogy, it's better than the other two, objectively in every single measurement except maybe pure raw unbridled creativeness. Technotheism takes that. Wait till I go in on technotheism. You guys are not going to be happy about that. But like musically, it's so much more put together. The musicianship is so much better. It's better on every single front. But it was uninteresting, and I think that's the worst thing an album can be, because it can be poorly produced, and it can have shitty structures, and it can have inconsistent recordings. But if it resonates with people, it doesn't matter. And seemingly that's what happened with technotheism, whereas this one, even if it's more polished, relatively speaking, because I know the production still isn't great because I'm the one doing it, it can be polished, it can be uniform, it can have all these really cool ideas, but if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. There's some highlights. Funny enough, The Seer was one that I'm pretty sure I scrapped, and I fucking hated that song. Then it came out, and that was one of the only memorable moments on the album, which sucks. I couldn't tell you what happens in like Exile. You know, I barely remember Plague Bringers. That one has a breakdown for a chorus. Yeah. And then there's Agents of Retribution. I don't even know what happens. Oh, Pathways. Pathways is fun. Unleashed sucks. That song sucked. I should have scrapped that song. That song sucks. I had a feeling, because a lot of the times when I'm working on a song and I'm like, I hate this song's fucking stupid, almost always that turns out to be people's favorite song. And I'm like, okay, well, this song it's got a lot of clean vocals, it's pretty shameless, it's pretty dumb, and it has one interesting salient moment where it drops down to the 8th string, which I very rarely let Logan do. And so I was like, fuck it, with my luck, that'll be the one everyone likes. And it wasn't, which is good. That song was basically the transition from Metamtechnosis. It was the oldest song on Transhuman Ascendant. It was Metamtechnosis era. It just wasn't finished, so it got bumped to this one. And it just feels very juvenile compared to the rest of them. It feels kind of obligatory. It just sucks. It's just bad. It just doesn't fit together very well. I fucked with that pre-chorus so many times, and it just didn't really sound good. The only real redeeming factor is the harmonies on the chorus are fucking great. They're like chromatic, and I did them by ear, and I'm so happy with how they turned out. But basically every other part of that song sucks and is bad. So I don't think anyone would be like, hey, I like that song. I don't think so. Because I say that about Emanate. People are like, hey, I liked Emanate. Just like, well, Emanate sucks and you're wrong. But I don't think anybody's going to defend Unleashed. It's not a good song. What else is on that? I think I pretty much covered it. If we're taking a look here, like the Technotheism 1 and 2. Like Technotheism 1, it's track 11, right? Yeah. Wasn't very memorable, though. A couple of riffs are memorable for me just because I like them, but I think overall it's kind of like a bland, like, what is the chorus? I think it was like some weird chromatic thing. Don't remember. The instrumental ones, right? Synthetic Morality is an amazing song, not made memorable because there's no vocals. There's no room for vocals. it's like an experiment. It's probably like the last Design Abstract song that's like weird and experimental in composition. And we'll probably never do something like that again. And then Manufactured Omniscience, the orchestral track, that was kind of like, I was trying to flex my film score stuff. I know it's boring. Like I knew the whole time it was boring. I stand by that. Yeah. Yeah. Secrets Uncovered is good, but it's like scattered. Like, okay. What I don't like about the composition and about the lack of orchestral shit on this album in general is like Constructs was made the way that I used to make it, the way I did Emanate, just full orchestral score, start to finish. And if there's parts where the orchestra doesn't fit, it's just quiet, but it still keeps going. But then I realized nobody cares, nobody can even hear it. So in technotheism, I started just mapping out string patches. It's just like, okay, there just needs to be strings here. So I'm just going to pull up strings, the patch, and just write chords. That's fine. And if I need some soloistic instruments or if I need something more comprehensive, I'll just add those layers. And this album, the problem with it is that it was that to the extreme where every single chunk of every song is boxed off. So I did like a different orchestration thing, right? And I think that's most apparent in Secrets Uncovered, even if it sounds good, right? Because that intro is like the glitchy guitar and synth stuff. Never give up hope. And then we go into it and that melody is brought over to the strings. That's fine. Like, and then when it, the epica thing, it's too late to turn back now. And like the orchestra is following it. We do another cut and there's like, I don't know. It's just, every section sounds different from every other section in like an arrangement way. And I just kind of I'm just not about it. It sounds like very chaotic, I guess. And it was me trying to be like, this needs to have this, and it needs to have this, it needs to have this, or it's not the Design Abstract, right? And it's crazy how much, in comparison, how much Constructs achieves with so little. Like, it's still a futuristic sci-fi band, but go ahead and pick out a synth part. And I mean synth, not orchestra, actual synth. Like, they're there, but they're really subtle. They are just like atmosphere. And I think it's a lot better to keep them that way. They're different things and they're different goals, but the motivation behind Transhuman Ascendant led it to be a weaker release than it could have been, just because of that, all the elements, the lack of me controlling it. Again, there's some great things that can come out of me just sitting back and not doing shit, like Gods of a Dead World. I didn't touch the guitars on that except for like 2 spots, and it turned out great. But alternatively, I did the majority of the guitars on Technotheism and on Constructs, and you can kind of tell there's a cohesiveness to it. Not that Logan doesn't write cohesive guitar parts, but Logan doesn't write riffs that fit my style of overall composition unless they're used in specific parts, right? I know when to be like, hey, this needs a Logan riff, because we're just going to talk about fucking Constructs. That intro, okay, we're talking about Calculated Brain Death. There's the intro, and then there's that initial verse breakdown. And like, I wrote that, obviously. That's a very me riff. But then the next riff, that's 1,000% Logan, where the like stupid melodic, right? That was him. And that was me being like, this riff needs to be a Logan riff, but basically none of the other stuff is, because it needs to be sparing. Whereas Transhuman, basically he had free reign, and I would structure it, but I didn't replace riffs or punch riffs in largely. I did for Plaguebringers, but overall I was just like, okay, these are the riffs we're working with. Let me arrange them in the best order that I see fit. But again, his writing doesn't work the best with how I structure songs. Not as good as it could have been if I just sat down and wrote some ideas out. It could have been stronger. It would have been less like mind numbing, I think, because there's just, his riffs are kind of an information overload when they're all back to back. And I get that like the design abstract is an information overload, but yeah. I think that about does it. Like I said, past this point, we're going to get into more technical explanations of why I don't like these albums. But this one was definitely a weird one, I guess.